We have been taught to worship stillness as the ultimate sign of a healthy civilization. We look at a horizon that does not tremble, and we call it peace. We look at a system that does not change, and we call it stability. But in the natural world, absolute stillness is a lie. It is a mask worn by a planet that is preparing to tear itself apart. The Galactic Republic spent 1,000 years admiring its own reflection in the calm waters of Coruscant, oblivious to the fact that water only stays that still when it is stagnant. They mistook the absence of visible conflict for the presence of health, failing to realize that stability is not a permanent state. It is merely a pause between shifts of power. In the eyes of the universe, a system that does not move is not safe. It is simply resisting the inevitable, building up a reservoir of tension that the galaxy can no longer contain. In geology, when two massive plates meet, they do not slide smoothly past one another. They grind, they snag, and they lock. This is where the danger begins. As long as the plates are locked, the surface remains peaceful. But beneath the crust, the pressure is screaming. This is the seismic debt of the Republic. For 25,000 years, the Senate and the Jedi Order forced the galaxy to remain locked in a single, unchanging shape. They denied the natural shifts of political and spiritual gravity, demanding that the world stay exactly as they had designed it. Every year that passed without a tremor was not a victory for peace. It was an addition to the debt. They were not preventing a catastrophe. They were merely ensuring that when the snap finally came, it would not be a localized earthquake, but a galactic-scale extinction event. They traded 100 small, necessary changes for one final, unsurvivable collapse. Stability creates a false sense of security that leads to fragile engineering. When you believe the ground will never move, you build your towers out of glass and your foundations out of pride. The Republic was a masterpiece of fragile design, a structure that functioned perfectly as long as the wind never blew. Because they hadn't felt a real shock in a millennium, they stopped preparing for the movement of the Earth. They replaced resilience with ritual and replaced adaptability with dogma. They became a civilization of glass, beautiful and transparent, but utterly incapable of absorbing a blow. They forgot that the only thing that survives a tectonic shift is that which is flexible enough to bend. By the time the first crack appeared in the Senate floor, it was already too late. The entire edifice had become so rigid that it could only shatter, turning its own grandeur into a million jagged shards of betrayal. While the masters sat in their high chairs and the senators debated the semantics of law, the undercurrents of the galaxy were shifting. You cannot mandate the stillness of the deep. There were worlds in the outer rim that were starving, cultures that were being erased, and a force that was crying out for a change in tide. The Republic ignored these signals because they didn't fit the narrative of stability. They viewed every tremor of unrest as a nuisance to be suppressed, rather than a signal to be heard. They treated the symptoms of the shift as crimes against the peace, effectively plugging the volcanic vents of the galaxy. By forcing the heat to stay underground, they ensured that the eventual eruption would be total. They were sitting on a powder keg of their own making, convinced that as long as they didn't see the spark, the fire wouldn't dare to exist. We cling to the myth of stability because we are terrified of the dark. The Jedi and the Republic fell because they fell in love with their own sunset, convinced it was high noon. They believed their order was the final evolution of history, a permanent state of being that the Force would never dare to disturb. But the Force is not a static lake, it is a tectonic engine. It demands movement. It demands the death of the old to make room for the birth of the new. Their stability was a direct defiance of the galaxy's need to breathe. They became an obstacle to the universe's natural rhythm, and the universe has a very violent way of removing obstacles that refuse to move on their own. They weren't destroyed by a villain. They were erased by the very evolution they tried to outlaw. When a locked tectonic plate finally breaks, The release of energy is instantaneous and absolute. It is a moment where time seems to fold in on itself, and the world you knew is replaced by a landscape you don't recognize. Order 66 was the sound of the galaxy's spine finally snapping back into place. It was the snap that ended the 10,000-year lie of stability. In the silence that followed the roar of the engines and the hum of the blades, the illusion was finally gone. The galaxy realized that safety was never a wall you could build. It was a flow you had to follow. The Republic didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it was too stiff to survive the turn of the tide. And as the dust settled over the ruins of the temple, the universe began to move again, indifferent to the giants who had been crushed in the process of its awakening. The myth was dead, and the truth was just beginning to breathe.